Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're tackling something massive, literally one of the most staggering logistical and human endeavors of the 20th century. We're talking about the incredible survival and the incredibly methodical assembly of India as a newborn nation. It's a story of a country birthed in unimaginable trauma that somehow managed to stitch itself together into the world's largest democracy. It was absolutely a trial by fire. To really understand how they pulled this off, we've broken down our roadmap into what's essentially a post-colonial survival checklist. We're going to journey through 5 foundational pillars: the price of freedom, drafting the republic, unifying the map, redrawing by language, and finally, stepping onto the global stage. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the price of freedom. We are dropping right into the drama, and frankly, the deep trauma of August 1947. Freedom from colonial rule had finally arrived, but man, it came with a massive price. To grasp the sheer chaos of partition, you really just have to look at this number: 72 days. That's it. That was the shockingly brief window between the announcement of the Mountbatten Plan and the actual date of independence. In that tiny window of time, a British lawyer named Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a man who had zero prior exposure to India or its complex realities, was tasked with drawing the new national borders. He literally had mere weeks to divide millions of people based on outdated census data. The execution of these, well, totally anomalous and faulty borders instantly triggered one of the largest mass migrations in human history, with entire communities suddenly finding themselves on the quote-unquote wrong side of an invisible line. Panic set in. We're talking about roughly 15 million Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs being displaced, millions desperately fleeing across the newly drawn boundaries of India and Pakistan just to find safety. And the human cost of this chaotic transition was utterly devastating. As those millions moved, the fragile social fabric completely unraveled, and communal riots became the norm. Now, while exact numbers remain estimates just due to the sheer scale of the chaos, historical records show that widespread communal violence claimed the lives of up to 500,000 people. It was a tragedy of truly incomprehensible proportions. And this scene brilliantly illustrates the staggering reality behind those numbers. Notice the refugee train there, packed to the absolute brim. The long lines of refugees marching across borders on foot were known as kafilas, but as you can see, so many also crowded onto these trains. These fleeing minorities were forced to leave their homes and property behind, living in intense fear and insecurity. They often arrived at their destinations with absolutely nothing but their lives. You know, the sheer absurdity of Radcliffe's hasty border commission was captured so powerfully by the poet W.H. Auden. He wrote, "Unbiased, at least he was when he arrived on his mission, having never set eyes on the land he was called to partition." It injects such a profound emotional resonance into the historical facts, doesn't it? It's a stark reminder of the careless bureaucratic strokes that divided a subcontinent. So, with the landscape fractured and the population reeling from the ashes of partition chaos, we have to ask a crucial question. How did the infant nation take up the challenge? How do you pivot from sheer survival to the active architectural assembly of a functioning state? Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Drafting the Republic. Amidst all that chaos, India's leaders were simultaneously working to write the fundamental rulebook that would govern this massive, diverse population as a democratic secular republic. And the timeline of this drafting was both swift and incredibly deliberate. It actually began in December 1946, even before independence, when the Constituent Assembly first met and Jawaharlal Nehru placed the Objectives Resolution. Then, over the next few years, incorporating huge milestones like the UN's 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they meticulously crafted the document right up until its adoption in November 1949. The drafting committee, which was chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, had a monumental task in front of them. They successfully fused the profound ideals of the Indian freedom struggle, like the promise of universal adult franchise and fundamental rights, with the absolute highest global standards of the era. They didn't just copy other nations, though. They built a secular republican framework that was entirely unique to India's specific needs. Right, let's look at Section 3, Unifying the Map. So while the rules of the new nation were being drafted on paper, the physical map of the nation was a complete logistical nightmare. When the British left, they didn't just leave behind British India. They left behind over 500 semi-autonomous princely states. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. The key to solving this puzzle was a brilliant legal tool called the Instrument of Access. This was a document that enabled these local rulers to hand over control of defense, external affairs, and communications to the central government. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel brilliantly utilized this document, sweetening the deal with the promise of generous privy purses, to rapidly and methodically unify that fractured territory.
Now, it was really a tale of two integrations here. On one hand, you had the vast majority of the 500-plus princely states willing to sign the instrument of accession peacefully. They were often pressured by powerful people's movements within their own borders. But on the other hand, you had the holdouts. A few key states, specifically Kashmir, Junagadh, and Hyderabad, initially refused to join, and that created some really intense geopolitical tension.
Now, what's really interesting here is the specific case of Hyderabad. Its recalcitrant ruler, the Nizam, flat out declared his kingdom independent. His militia, the Razakars, faced immense popular anger, which actually led to a communist-led people's movement. This ultimately forced the Indian government to execute a rapid 48-hour police action to secure the territory and officially integrate Hyderabad into the Union.
Which brings us to Section 4, Redrawing by Language.
So the outer borders were finally secured, but almost immediately the government faced massive internal pressure. See, the old colonial map divided land purely for administrative convenience. But now, the citizens of this new constitutional democracy demanded the redrawing of state boundaries based on cultural and linguistic identities. What followed was a massive political tug-of-war. In 1949, the JVP Committee, which included Nehru and Patel, postponed the creation of linguistic states. They were terrified it would threaten national unity so soon after the horrors of partition. But they just couldn't stop the democratic tide. The government's initial delay led to mounting public pressure, escalating dramatically by 1952, and ultimately forcing the creation of the States Reorganization Commission in 1955.
The undeniable catalyst for this action was the supreme sacrifice of Poti Srimamalu. In 1952, he began a fast, demanding a separate state for Telugu-speaking people. He fasted for 58 days until his death. His passing ignited an absolutely unstoppable movement that forced the government to abandon its delays and systematically address linguistic reorganization. And that brings us to this incredible map from 1956. Visually, it represents the government finally conceding to democratic federalism. The States Reorganization Act completely transformed the internal geography of the country. It gave birth to beautifully composite linguistic states like Kerala, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, finally aligning the administrative borders with the actual cultural realities of the people. Finally, Section 5, the global stage.
Having successfully drafted a constitution, unified its outer borders, and harmonized its internal map, we arrive at the final step of nation building. It was time for India to step onto the global stage. They had to take this newly stabilized republic and give it a distinct voice in a world deeply polarized by the Cold War. So the crucial point is how they navigated this. They did it through a doctrine called Panchsheel, or the Five Virtues. Formulated largely by Prime Minister Nehru, these principles included mutual respect for sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, non-interference, equality and cooperation, and peaceful coexistence. This framework provided the ideological bedrock that allowed India to firmly refuse alignment with either the US or the USSR.
India's foreign policy truly matured and took the spotlight at the historic Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. Here, India asserted its leadership not by building up a massive army, but by unifying newly independent Afro-Asian countries against the shared traumas of colonialism, imperialism, and racism. It was literally the birth of the non-aligned movement.
But, non-alignment was severely misunderstood by some as simply being passive. Nehru powerfully clarified this in a statement, saying, "We are unaligned only in relation to the Cold War. Otherwise, we are free to condemn any development which we consider wrong." It was never about sitting on the sidelines. It was about preserving the sovereign freedom to actively fight for global justice without becoming a pawn in a superpower proxy war. From the chaotic, blood-stained borders of a rushed partition to the meticulously crafted linguistic map and a fiercely independent global voice, India's assembly is a masterclass in state building under pressure. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. As India successfully navigated its post-colonial trial by fire, how do the echoes of these foundational survival tactics continue to define the world's largest democracy today? It's a fascinating question and one that requires us to keep exploring. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep that curiosity alive.